I think Lewis has done a great job over the years, not becoming the billboard Lewis, but trying to remain the real Lewis. But the media make it increasingly difficult for the real Lewis to project himself to the point where he now just cowers away from them and, doesn't really do very much with them. And no surprise, because he's he knows they're always after the negative story. This is the thing about Gilles. You saw it once and you thought, wow, how did he get away with that? And then he did exactly the same thing the next time. And then you realize that was what he was doing all the time. And there isn't really a driver today about which you can say that, I think.
Odds makers currently give Charles Leclerc a 17% chance of winning the Drivers' Championship. Lewis only an 11% chance. If you were to pick an F1 driver, a Ferrari F1 driver for the championship, would it be Charles or Lewis? Hello and welcome to another episode of the F1 Hour with my friend and yours, the goatiest F1 mind to have ever goated, the one that they call Peter D. Windsor. How are you doing, good sir?
I'm good, mate. Yeah, I think it's January now, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah.
Something like that. Happy New Year. So how did you spend the festive
You
period?
too. You too. Well, it's been a little bit of a difficult time because the news broke just before Christmas that Rob Wilson had been taken very ill and he's still in hospital. It's looking a little bit more positive now, but obviously Rob and I are very close and he's a wonderful man, incredible racing brain. But I mean, that's not what it's all about. He's also a friend and yeah, he's been in hospital. It's a little bit more positive now, but it's still very, very serious. So more than anything, thoughts have been with Rob over the Christmas and New Year period. And I would imagine a lot of motor racing people feeling the same way because his contribution to motorsport and obviously to the careers of many drivers, rallying and motor racing has been immense. And really hoping that it's all going to pull through for Rob.
1000%, Mr. Windsor. Of course, we echo all of the aforementioned sentiments. Speaking of Rob Wilson, he was instrumental in the career of one Checo Perez, but sadly, between now and the last time that we spoke, Mr. Windsor, Checo Perez is no longer a Red Bull Racing driver. What do you make of that news, sir?
Well, just to tidy up one point, I don't think he was instrumental in the career of Checo. He certainly did quite a lot of work with him in the Force India days and had recently done a day with him it just in 2024, and Checo had really enjoyed it. And actually his performance has picked up a little bit for a while afterwards. I don't know. I haven't really thought about it. I just assume he's happy, relaxed with his family, got lots of money in the bank, and he's going to enjoy his life, isn't he? Isn't that what? I don't think we should be concerned about him. I think he's had a great career. Or I don't know. Am I missing something here?
He'll be okay. I think the pinch point was that there was a bit of back and forth as to the terms of the mutual. The termination of the contract by mutual consent, right? What did that agreement look like? Whether it was going to be an ambassadorial role. Horner's come out since and said that Checo will still be a part of the Red Bull Racing family. He'll be doing show runs next year, but do you know what I mean? Like they've still got to pay him.
Yeah. Well, I mean, all that was, yeah, and that's all kind of predictable what was going to happen. I'm glad it is, and it's good for him. And obviously they have reached an agreement. We're happy on both sides. So yeah, I just wish him well in his retirement and enjoy his life is all I can say.
Do you think we'll see Checo Perez next in a Formula One car, potentially Cadillac F1 in 2026? Or do you think if he does come back to racing that it should be in NASCAR or IndyCar, Peter?
I hadn't really thought about it. I don't think Cadillac would run him, would they? Why would they? Surely for a start, they're going to want an American, I would imagine, in one car. And then secondly, they'll want somebody pretty much of the moment who's quick and, going to bring a lot to the team. I can't imagine Perez would fill that role now, especially if he's been sort of on the sidelines for a while. I'd like to see him do something like the Carrera Panamericana, something really gritty and not something that inevitably will end up going nowhere like, the sort of Kimi NASCAR or the Montoya NASCAR stuff and actually do something that's more in keeping with his heritage, that part of the world. Baja, he should go and do Baja and become the next Carlos Sainz Sr. doing Paris-Dakar or something. That's more how I would like to see him go, but I doubt he will. I can't imagine he'll do anything. I think he'll just enjoy his life when he's got a young family and You just do all the Red Bull stuff like DC and just,
I think that would be my, if I were Checo Perez, I think that would be my play. But I get the sense that he feels that there's unfinished business for him as far
really?
as Formula. Yeah, 100%, Peter.
Oh, I would imagine if anybody isn't saying anybody close to him isn't saying you massively over delivered in Formula One, and you're very you've had a great career in Formula One, and you're very lucky to be at Red Bull when you were, and just enjoy the rest of your life. I can't imagine he would ever find anything as fulfilling as being with Red Bull when they had a good car and winning races. So I think a full stop should be put at the end of that sentence, and wish him well, and that's it.
Full stop, new paragraph,
Yeah,
Mr. Windsor.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
tricky though, isn't it, Mr. Windsor? As a world championship winning team manager, how do you broach that topic with an F1 driver? It's always, they call it the boxer's curse, that boxers never know when to
Mhm.
when to full stop a new paragraph, right, and call it a
Well,
day.
obviously, it depends on whether that driver is under contract for the following year, and you've made up your mind in the existing year that you don't want him in the team anymore. It's one thing to have to break a contract, and it's another if the contract obviously runs out at the end of that year, and it's a free market anyway. Even if he does want to continue and renew, it's pretty easy to say, well, we're going in another direction. But no, I really think that that is a personal thing for a racing driver to decide if they want to get into a racing car again. And that can happen at any moment, as we saw with Nico Rosberg, as we've seen with some drivers who've just walked away mid-season. And that's something that is entirely their prerogative. And we should never, ever influence them one way or the other if they've decided they don't want to get into a car again. I think if you've got a driver and you don't feel he's delivering in terms of performance and speed, I think we need to look at Frank Williams and his loyalty to Jacques Lafitte in 1984, when he could have run Ayrton Senna in that car. But because he had a contract with Jacques Lafitte, he stuck with the contract. And I think, really that should become the benchmark around which all Formula One team owners should operate. I mean, Frank, that was one great thing that Frank did. Another was he never poached sponsors from other teams unless they were out there on the free market. And it's odd to me that it's a bit like, all the car companies today completely ignoring everything that Colin Chapman stood for, as Peter Wright confirmed with the interview we did with him, and just carrying on their own way with very high center of gravity, unbelievably heavy cars with terrible aerodynamics, the complete opposite to everything Colin Chapman worked for. It's a bit the same thing, it's too much. We've got to do what's best for the team, best for the stakeholders, the great stakeholders,
Hmm.
and not enough respecting the benchmarks of the likes of Sir Frank Williams. And that was there. That's in the stake. You don't sign an Ayrton Senna if you've got a Jacques Lafitte under contract. And I think full marks to Frank for doing that. So I would adhere to the Frank Williams principle, to be honest.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, it'd be remiss of me to talk to oppose the legend that is Sir Frank Williams. I mean,
Mm.
a decent racing mind, if ever you've seen one. Speaking of that ethos, Peter, the proper racing ethos, one of the key topics, story arcs going into 2025 will be whether Mercedes and Red Bull can fix for their cars mechanical ills, aerodynamic travails, etc., etc. On the race podcast, Mark Hughes said that what they need to do is a big portion of that is building, is basically stealing what McLaren managed to do so well in 2024, which was, of course, that flexi wing, that front flexi wing that worked so brilliantly around Italy, as an example, that allowed Lando to experience or to leverage downforce on the combined entry of turn one, turn two, the first chicane, but then be super slippery down the straights. What do you make of that, Peter? Do you think Mercedes and Red Bull need to get to grips with the front flexi wing / mini DRS at the back?
No, I think that's a red herring. I think a lot of it is stuff that we can't see under the car, and it's the floor. It's all the stuff that controls the air around the back of the car, and sorry, from the front to the back of the car, exiting the car, underneath the car. And if it was a question of flexi wings, everybody would have caught up within a couple of races. So I don't think that is the situation. And of course, the flexi wing didn't do Lando that much good in the second chicane on the opening lap anyway. Admittedly, it was Oscar Piastri that put him under pressure, but nonetheless, if he'd had this amazing grip, maybe he would have held the lead. So no, I don't think it's that. What I do think is that these regulations are in their final year. And as I've been saying for quite a long time now, there is a brick wall at the end of any given regulation. And it is what you can achieve given all the things that are there aerodynamically, performance-wise, engine-wise. And it stands to reason, logical reason, that more than one team will get it almost 100% right in 2025 because there's a limit to what you can do. It's not as if the regulations are constantly changing and you've got all these genies out there looking at ways that the rules can be reinterpreted and some amazing spark will be lit in their brains as they're sitting in the bath on a Friday night that will give them an advantage over all the other teams. None of that will happen in 25 because we've had these regulations for a long time and they haven't changed in italics. So I think, I mean, just getting around to who will do the best job. I think Ferrari will be better than they were in 24 in terms of consistency. And you could put forward quite a strong argument to say that it's going to be McLaren and Ferrari, and then the sort of tier below that could well be Red Bull and Mercedes. But that's, even that is taking a lot for granted because we don't really have a fix on how good or bad Red Bull are now in the post-Adrian Newey era. And we thought that it was looking pretty good. And then came the last race of the season, and they didn't look very good. And if that's their sort of building block for the winter and where they're going, they've got a lot of work to do at Red Bull. And then nobody seems to be talking about Aston Martin anyway. The great Adrian Newey is now at Aston Martin. So in theory, they should be right up there with McLaren and Ferrari, shouldn't they?
Well,
Of course, his influence is really only going to be in effect for 26. But nonetheless, we've seen Adrian on a pit wall at Red Bull when after Friday practice, second practice, Max has been complaining about this or that. And then magically, Saturday morning, they've got a new setup on the car and he's out there getting the pole. How many times have we seen that at Red Bull?
so
And
true.
so, therefore, just to make the point, Adrian is not just a designer who will go away as a boffin and create some amazing aerodynamic solution to the 26 regs when they're finalized. He's also a great race engineer. He's also a great guy to get a car working. So I think anybody who discounts Aston Martin and Fernando Alonso from here on in does so at their peril.
You think he could turn it around that quickly, Peter? Because
Well, it's not turn it around. I think it's just manage the car really well in terms of setup. And obviously, he'll be able to do a few things to that car. It's not as if he's going to be able to redesign it. Obviously not. But he's going to be able to do a few little tweaks for sure. If everybody's talking about flexi wings, it's just a question of everybody having flexi wings. Well, okay, bring it on. Let's put the flexi wings on the Aston Martin, controlled by Adrian Newey, and let's see how quick that car is.
blimey, that would be incredible.
If
One,
that's the case, as I say, I've got my doubts that it is something as straightforward and simple as flexi wings because it would have been clear by now.
yeah.
With the other teams, it's not that difficult from a flexi wing point of view. Much more difficult is the complexity of the underside of the car.
Isn't the point with the flexi wing though, Peter, that it's almost like a cheat code that if you've got a B plus level Venturi tunnels, like if the downforce that you can gain from all of the sexy bits that you talk about is B plus, but then you tack on A plus flexi front wing, that you offset that deficit to an Adrian Newey designed Venturi tunnel that's aerodynamically efficient, right? Especially if he doesn't have it. Isn't that the point, Peter?
Yeah, but you're telling me he's not going to be able to design a new
Fair.
Venturi tunnel
Agreed.
that takes him up into
Agreed.
the McLaren area?
Yeah.
Of course he
Fair.
is.
Yeah. Agreed.
I mean, designing a new Venturi tunnel isn't designing a completely new Formula One car.
Yeah. Agreed. And or designing a brand new flexi wing that's if they can do that. I think that's the big question from a Red Bull perspective, because Vache said that the reason why they didn't do flexi wing A and have a bespoke rear wing for a Monza as an example is because they ran out of budget and didn't want to infringe the cost cap, right? So if you're normalizing, then Red Bull are going to take a massive step on if they bring a flexi wing that passed the low test in 2025 now.
Yeah, in theory, but again, I don't think it's that simple. I really don't think it's that simple. And that to me comes under the heading of they're running something special on the car and nobody knows what it, to me, it's all about the complexity of the underside of the car. And yeah, it's a flexi wing circuits like Monza, no doubt about it. But they're also very quick on tight circuits too. Lando on a street circuit in 24 was brilliant, wasn't he?
He wasn't bad. He wasn't bad at all. Talk to me about Lando Norris then, Mr. Windsor, because this feels like this is one of those ones where we diverge ever so slightly.
Mm.
Lando keeps Lando keeps talking about next year being his year. That if he learned anything from 2024, it's that he had the requisite minerals to challenge a Max Verstappen or a Sir Lewis Hamilton over the course of a 24 race season. Are you buying what Lando Norris is selling, Peter? Can he be a challenge proper in 2025 for the drivers?
Oh, he can absolutely for sure be a challenge, and he could well be world champion next year. There's no doubt about that. He's got a car capable of winning the world championship in front of him. So why wouldn't he be a contender? But so is Oscar Piastri, as I often say. So that's his biggest challenge, is how he's going to beat Oscar to the championship. Uh, Beyond that, I don't know. I think he's probably been misquoted. A lot of that. I can't imagine him saying 25 is going to be my year. I know he said that as he crossed the line, but I don't think it's going to be. I don't think he feels that arrogant about it. He'd be the first to say there are a lot of people I'm going to have to beat. I'm just going to put my head down and work very hard, and try to win the world championship. And he won't go on about having to beat Oscar Piastri, but of course that'll be in the back of his mind because that's his biggest challenge for sure. And but I've no doubt at all that he has the capability of winning the championship and could well do so. And I hope he does in a way because, well, I say I hope he does. Of course, I hope he does. I mean, I'd hate to see anybody who's got a real chance not achieve that. But it still irks when I think about all that dribble on the radio about, if you want to have the championship, the team behind you, think of the championship, Lando. If you want the team behind you, give the win to Oscar. I still think, what was that all about? And we've never had an adequate explanation from McLaren as to what that was all about. It was completely ridiculous, wasn't it? If you
Yeah,
think about it, what
yeah.
was it? Where did this great effort come from that to help him win the championship as a result of giving the thing to Oscar? Oh yeah, a sprint win in Brazil or wherever it was, big deal. So I mean, that's the problem. Well, I don't know if it's a problem. I hope McLaren will have learned over the winter and how to run a team properly. Because if they want to focus on Lando, and Lando's out there saying it, possibly because he hopes the team will think, yeah, we've got to put all our effort into Lando now. And maybe that's what he's thinking. Bit naive for him to think that, given the way they've behaved already. But if McLaren do not put effort, I mean, of course they're going to have the same effort in both cars, but they've got to have a priority system, as Michael has shown the world, did show the world so clearly in the Ferrari era. And that is the way to do it. And as Max has been showing the world ever since, really.
Yeah.
And Mercedes trying to show the world with Lewis, but messing it up with Nico and then with George Russell.
Yeah.
The other car. But if they had, I keep saying, if Daniel Ricciardo was in the other McLaren right now, absolutely everything that Lando's saying would be totally justified. But he doesn't have Daniel Ricciardo. That is the problem. He's got Oscar Piastri. And Oscar Piastri is a completely different animal to Daniel. He's much quicker.
Let's play F1 hypotheticals for a second, Mr. Windsor. What if McLaren have Oscar Piastri, who, on the back of being managed by Mark, has a stipulation in his contract that says that you can't multi-21 him, just as Mark Webber got done over back in the day. Plus, what if McLaren think that one day in the not too distant future, maybe 2-3 seasons down the road, that Oscar will be their guy, most likely to take them back to the Drivers' Championship mountaintop? Would that explain some of the indecision, do you think?
Well, I think absolutely for sure. There's nothing in the Oscar Piastri contract which says that he has to finish number 2 to Lando Norris, unless the championship is out of reach or it's so crazy. The difference between them in points is so large that to do anything else would be nonsense. Otherwise, he's free to race. I would put my house on the fact that that is there in the Piastri contract. So of course that explains everything they did in Monza and other places. And of course, it explains why now it's not going to be an easy time for Lando Norris, because he knows that the number one guy he's got to beat next year is Oscar Piastri. Sorry, this year is Oscar Piastri. Yeah, I mean, whether it was Mark Webber or anybody else, there's no way in the world you would have conceded to be number 2 in signing, especially in what is it, year three now? Why would you do that?
Yeah, yeah. I
Never
think
in a million years would you concede that he would be subject to team orders.
no.
It appears, if anything, Lando's the guy that signed, to agree to that, given the way he behaved in Hungary.
Wow, bombshell setting. But that would
But
explain it
I'm
all.
surprised in a way, Cameron, you haven't mentioned the other quote from Lando, which wasn't there one I saw out there on the internet saying that, or maybe you're going to mention it, but this thing when Lando's saying, we fail to understand how hard everybody else works in a Formula One team. The drivers are just a small part of the package, and it's all the other people that should really be the heroes. And any driver that ever complains about anything should be thrown out of the pit lane because they don't deserve to be in Formula One. I saw that quote recently. So I'm paraphrasing, obviously,
Yeah.
but I thought that was quite good for him to say that, if he did say that. Although, of course, he did miss out a little bit of the Bertrand Schaefer guide to being a good racing driver. Bertrand Schaefer, of course, remember, was quite a quick Formula 3 driver in his own right, and then did a very good job in FIA Formula 3 for many years. And his philosophy always was to make sure the drivers sweat the floor of the garage after the race and after practice and free practice on Friday, and fetched and carried for the mechanics, food, drinks, etc. And I'm surprised Lando left that bit out, actually, because I think that's what Formula One drivers should also do.
Unbelievably.
Silence from Cameron.
No, 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 no. I think you nailed it. But then the stories that I hear of Lando, that he's one of those drivers who would spend, like, go late into the night with the engineers building the car. Like, maybe
Yeah,
not this
exactly.
year
That's why, I
necessarily.
mean,
Yeah.
Lando's a proper guy and he's a proper racer and he's got a good heart. And that sums up Lando, I think. And of course, he'd be there fetching, carrying for the boys. I'm not sure he would necessarily want to pick up a broom and start sweeping the floor, but, fair enough. I think it'd be a nice thing to do periodically.
Yeah. Well,
I'm surprised. It's a shame that the FA didn't get Max to do some of that actually with his stuff. I know he's doing a great job out there and doing what he's doing with the kids and stuff. Where is it? Ghana, I think, somewhere like that.
Rwanda.
Rwanda, very
Yeah.
good. But I think also, once for 1 hour per Grand Prix in 2025, he should have had to have been sweeping the floor of the garage, shouldn't he? Or the pit lane, or emptying the garbage in the back of the paddock, or something like that.
Well, the point is, well, Max Verstappen's rebuttal would be, and the other drivers, you don't want to treat us like kids, right? We're millionaires, we're drivers, we're the asset in the
No,
F1
not
track.
like kids, just like normal people. There's a difference, I think.
Fair play.
I think remind them that they are normal people. They're not superstar mega drivers. They're just normal people like everybody else. That's what Lando's saying in that when he says that, and he's right. And all this star business, it's not good for the human soul, is it? You shouldn't start idolizing other humans. It puts you on the wrong path.
Yeah, I agree with you, but
Everything's transient, everything's fragile,
so true.
everything's ephemeral.
So,
So, we should always try to keep our feet on the ground. And one way to do that is to make sure our so-called superstars remain, normal.
is there? Go
Say
on
that
then.
we shouldn't be doing stuff as well.
Oh,
I mean, everybody in the
100%.
paddock patch should do a garbage collection run.
100%, Peter, to keep your feet on the ground. I
Yeah,
think,
absolutely. I'd be up for that.
yeah, no, I agree with that. I think that's a brilliant idea. But I think to punish them as if they're naughty children for, say, dropping an F bomb about a car that you're frustrated.
Well, it's a
Like,
different thing. I mean,
yeah,
I mean, the punishment is one thing. The crime is what we're really talking about here. Is that a crime or not? And as I said at the time, my initial reaction was, good on the FIA president. And then I thought about it and I thought, well, really, it's not Max that should be paying the penalty here. It's more the media team around him, or the so-called media team. I don't know what you call them these days. The Formula One team, the sort of dozen or so people that follow him everywhere. They're the people that should have been easily advising him. And this applies to every team and every driver on when, if you want to express yourself a little bit more liberally, you can do it. And when, because of the society you're in and the audience that you're speaking to, you've got to be a little bit more circumspect. And it's not difficult. It's not difficult to create
mm,
that and to have some ground rules on when to swear and when not. And I blame the teams and they're all those ridiculously populated marketing divisions for not doing that.
yeah,
Because what else do those people do if they don't, try and control what the drivers are saying? If they're going to make the driver the mouthpiece of the team, at least make sure the mouthpiece understands when to suck and when to blow.
yeah, agreed. I think to see that, Peter, and raise you this, I think Max would have been acutely aware that the rules are the rules and that they state that in an FIA press conference, an F-bomb probably isn't the route, the linguistic route down which you want to go. I think Max would have been aware of that. But I think
Well, he
to
may have been aware of it, but he
mm,
may not have been trained in that area. It's one thing to be aware of it. It's another
fair.
thing for the team behind him to say, look, if somebody says this to you and winds you up, this is when you need your brain needs to go into this mode.
Mm,
Okay, I'm in a dignified 3 times world champion, 4 times world champion, FIA public environment mode. But when somebody says that to you in front of the motorhome and it's a TV camera for a specific country, yeah, then you can be a little bit more open. You've got to coach them. You can't just say, "Oh, be
no.
aware of it." It's what it's all about. It's like it's no different from being a nutritionist. It's no different from being a
Mm,
physio. It's no different from being a race engineer. It's not just telling them the rules. It's making sure that they abide by the rules in different situations. Being a
yeah,
teacher, it's not difficult. And if the teams of people, these Formula One teams are employing to do all this marketing and PR, whatever you want to call it, as I keep saying, because I've no idea what it's all about anyway, then aren't capable of doing that, then they're guilty of employing the wrong people.
yeah, it's a good shout, Peter.
As I say, it comes back to Singapore when I was doing a thing with Yuki Tsunoda, and he arrived with two team people and two security guards. And they just stood there doing nothing anyway. It didn't help at all. So I don't understand what it's all about, to be honest. Well, I do understand. It's all just nonsense, isn't it?
It's
It's
financial
just everybody, everybody's got a job and nobody really wants to actually do anything.
financial resources overall.
Yeah,
But
yeah. But I mean, going back to the point, and the reason I say that about Max is because he spent all his life being a racing driver, not being a public speaker. And it's not to say that he doesn't, as you correctly say. Of course, he knows the rules, but it's a question of getting him to apply the rules in the heat of the moment. And that's something that those teams of PR people should be able to do.
and I get, Peter, why in the official FIA drivers press conference why it's forbid expletives and colourful language are forbidden. I understand that, but isn't I would flip reverse that ever so slightly, and as your exhibit A, Drive to Survive, that one of the reasons why it was so brilliant for Formula One and growing the market and bringing new eyes to the sport was that you got to see drivers being themselves, right? Expletive language, and also this is the point that you made on a gazillion occasions, Peter. Where is the footage, the official Formula One FIA footage, where we get to see Max Verstappen being Max Verstappen, expletives and all? Why don't we see that more often? Yet and still, notwithstanding your recommendation on a gazillion occasions, Peter.
Well, it's all to do with boring TV editor producer syndrome, isn't it? When
Yeah.
it's a tennis match and there's a great rally and a point is won, focus on the winner of the volley. You don't actually ever see the reactions of the losers instantaneously. And yet that's much better television, much better television. And it's the same thing. I would love to have seen Max after the Miami Grand Prix going
Oof.
into the Red Bull motorhome area and what he actually said to the engineers that time. First time McLaren really beat him and what he said. That's Formula One. That's the real thing that we need to be seeing, and which we're still not seeing. And you're right. That's the raw. And I've always said that. That is what we're missing so much still from the Formula One tapestry of what we could be showing. And it's not just the drivers. It's also, as I keep saying, it's also the engineers, it's the mechanics, as Lando says. It's the transports, it's the logistics. It's obviously a lot of the different groups of people in the factories back in the hometowns, home countries. So there are so many different segues you could do there, and yet we're not doing them. We're just sort of training these guys as these ridiculous superstars, and the signs are they're finding it quite difficult to live up to that big billboard they see of themselves as they're driving down the 401 freeway or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And that's a problem, isn't it? I think Lewis has done a great job over the years, not becoming the billboard Lewis, but trying to remain the real Lewis. But the media make it increasingly difficult for the real Lewis to project himself to the point where he now just cowers away from them and doesn't really do very much with them. And no surprise, because he's he knows they're always after the negative story, which is an ironic thing, isn't it? The sort of the gutter press are after the negative story, and yet the moving picture press are all after the positive, I'm shouting number one, I'm brilliant story, as distinct from throwing the helmet on the ground. What was that race all about story? It's a weird thing, that. I don't
It,
think it really matters what the daily press say anymore because I can't imagine too many people actually read the daily press anymore.
yeah, it's an interesting one as well. I've been criticised over the past couple of weeks for being overly negative a Lewis Hamilton fan going into 2025, talking about his age, his performance in 2024, and expressing scepticism about his chances of beating Charles Leclerc, a 27-year-old in his prime, incredibly quick, fire-breathing dragon of an F1 peddler. I know we've spoken about this before,
Mm.
Peter, but as the odds makers currently give Charles Leclerc a 17% chance of winning the Drivers' Championship, Lewis only an 11% chance. If you
Mm.
were to pick an F1 driver, a Ferrari F1 driver for the championship, would it be Charles or Lewis?
Well, no, I think that ratio is about right. I think Charles has a much better chance of winning a championship over points over a long season than Lewis. But I would give him much higher than what was it, 17%?
Charles,
So,
yeah.
yeah, that's ridiculous. Why would you only give him a 17% chance of winning the championship? That doesn't make any sense to me at all. I would give him at least. I mean, I don't know how does that work? That percentage thing.
So
What are they saying? I mean,
they run they would run a simulation of the championship under these current circumstances 100 times, and then they apportion. So they've given Lando 31%. He's currently the favourite. Max, they say, is 29%. Charlie is 17%. Lewis is
yeah, no,
11%.
I think that's a spurious, almost incomprehensible way of looking at it. I think you'd have all you can do is look at the driver and the championship and say, if you're Lando Norris now, what chance have you got of winning the world championship in 2025? I would say at least 85%. He's got an
Oof.
85% chance of winning the championship. I'd say Oscar Piastri's got an 84% chance. That's
Oof.
how I would look at it. That's how my brain works anyway. I would say Charles Leclerc's got a 73% chance. I'd say Lewis Hamilton's got about a 62% chance. George Russell's probably got something in the 70s.
Oof.
Yeah,
That's high for
absolutely.
George. That's high for
And so
George.
it goes on. And Max, I think, would be up there in the 80s as well.
Yeah.
But to sort of have a cake and divide it up into sectors doesn't make any sense because it doesn't do justice to anybody who's well, it doesn't do justice to Lando. He's got to have more than a 30% chance of winning the world championship. And what is that? How does that possibly even have any credibility? It doesn't. He's got a mega chance to win the championship.
Yeah, I mean they're making him the
See my
favourite.
point. I just don't understand the geometry they're using.
Yeah. Well, it's actuarial, isn't it, Pete? I understand the
Well,
pushback, but
you're dividing the championship up into a pie graph, and to me that doesn't make sense because if you give if you give Lando 70%, how can you possibly then give Oscar 70% on your system? But they've both got a 70% chance, approximately, or maybe even more.
so
That's my point.
this is the house's advantage, isn't it, Peter? That the combined genuinely the combined
Well, I think,
percentages of all the
that's
20.
overcomplicating it a bit. The other thing, Cameron, I was interested in, you call
Hmm.
it 2024, which sounds very cool, or 2025. But did you call it 1908 or 1989?
Not, you know what? It's interesting. When I refer to 19, I always say 19 for some
Yeah,
reason.
yeah.
But for 2024, 2025, it's just become a thing on the channel. People always banter me and say, "Why are you saying that?" It's become a quirk, almost a stick of the channel. I think I'll
Oh,
abbreviate it.
okay.
I think I'll abbreviate it further, Peter. I think it will become 25 because you've got to say it so often. It's like, oh bloody no, I've got to say
I have
2020.
no problem with that, providing you then say 191973. I have no problem.
I think it would throw people off, wouldn't it, Peter? It's not
Well, through
consistent.
Nico Rosberg. I remember interviewing Nico in, I don't know, whenever it was, 20, it must have been about 2015, 2016. And I said that to him. I said, so Nico, what do you think about 2015? He said, what do you mean? What are you talking about? I said, what do you think about 2015 last year? He said, you mean 2015?
Oh wow.
And I said, well, did you call it 1999? And he walked off and he didn't finish the interview.
Brilliant.
It's all
Brilliant.
about consistency, isn't it?
It,
Or not?
you know, I think it is all about consistency. But you got to. I think I've taken from your, at least from your very engaging way of presenting F1. It's got to be different, Peter, just a tad. I don't want to fall in line with the rest of the F1
Well,
journos.
I try not to be different. I just express what I think. It turns out that 99.9% of the time I am different, I suppose, but I don't know why.
A contrarian by nature,
Well, it's
because
just my upbringing. It's just different. Everybody has their own upbringing, don't they? Have their own imprint, their own fingerprint, and I have my own upbringing. And for me, It's still all about the sound of a 1100cc Formula Junior Elfin being warmed up on a crisp morning in April at Catalina Park, Katoomba, Australia, and listening to the sound of that little engine revving and Frank Maddich climbing into the car and going out and dominating the race. That's the adrenaline in my bloodstream when I think about racing, and nothing's ever changed, and everything's related to. I mean, we're talking about the swearing and all the rest of it, but I mean, I wouldn't, I would never have wanted to have seen Jim Clark or Dan Gurney behind the scenes because I would be afraid that maybe they do swear. I didn't want to see them swearing or hear them swearing. I wanted
Wow.
them to be how they are. And whilst a lot of people may say, oh, Drive to Survive, isn't it wonderful? We're seeing the other side of motor racing. I would say, isn't it wonderful? We had Jim Clark and Dan Gurney there to show us how to live our lives as racing people, and we should be living up to the standards that they set.
Very well said.
And Sterling Moss was a superstar. I don't remember him swearing massively, though.
Yeah, he was a
I
gentleman,
remember him
wasn't
waving his fist at back markers
he?
who held him up. But that's about it. On that subject, another of my bête noire, and I know that this is not a question from you,
No.
but I think it is incredibly impolite of any current racing driver who passes a lap car not to wave thank you out of the cockpit. I know it might cost them a little bit aerodynamically or whatever it is, but I think it's something that should be back in motor racing, a bit like the garlands they had for a while at the end of the sprint race. And I would love to see. I know we have obviously GPS, and everybody has to get out of the way, and you can't do any of this impeding, all that rubbish. But the bottom line is, even if you do it correctly, I still think that deserves a wave of thanks
Wow. That's
because
that's
they're not afraid to use a hand gesture if they felt they've been held up, right? But
true.
I can't remember the last time I actually saw a driver wave his hand to say thank you to a driver who let him pass. Maybe Lewis in Austria springs to mind.
I
Maybe
feel like
maybe I'm confusing it with something else, but
I feel like there was an instance last year, but it's evading my memory.
yeah. And I think there should actually be a bonus point for the driver that does the most waves of thank you to other drivers in the race, being polite
Good
when he
manners.
passes them, obviously.
I mean, manners are not very 2025, are they,
Or,
Peter?
I mean, bonus points going a bit far, but I think we should bring back the Prix Rouge et Blanc that Bernard Caillet very ably introduced to Formula One, which was adjudicated by a panel. And in those days, journalists, but it doesn't have to be journalists. It could be anything. But it's a prize that goes to the driver that shows the most respect and behaves in the most sporting way during the year. And it's won internally, if you like. It's voted for internally. It's nothing to do with the FIA. And it was called Prix Rouge et Blanc then because it was sponsored by Marlboro, who were red and white, obviously. But why not introduce something like that again to show that Formula One is actually doing something practical rather than all this stuff that these press releases about it's doing this, it's doing that, and we can't actually really see any of this, but actually have a proper vote, maybe even have one after every race, the
A,
most
a
the
fair
most sporting behavior by a driver.
a fair play award. It
Mm,
happens in football, so I don't know why they wouldn't do something
yeah,
like that in Formula
yeah.
One. It's a brilliant idea.
And I think that in that area, that's where saying thank you to somebody if they've let you past is something that should count for that award.
Yeah, I don't disagree. It's a nice idea, Peter, but I
Mm.
suspect that our pleas will fall on deaf ears. Peter, I
Well, it
want to
will, because they'll probably say, "Oh no, wouldn't
100%.
it be much better to have one for the least sporting behaviour and the driver who's been the most arrogant and the most difficult and the one that's been the most unhelpful?"
Yeah,
Yeah, there you go.
it's what
Great
put
for the great for the sport.
it's
Mega
what
publicity.
it's what puts bums in seats, isn't it, Peter? But again,
Yeah.
that speaks to the human fallacy more than the failings of F1 potentially, because we're the ones buying the tickets ultimately. Let me ask you about this as we round third base, Peter.
Hmm.
On Colossally That's History, Matt Bishop's podcast. I don't know whether you listened to it. They cited you. They did a couple of episodes on the brilliance of Gilles Villeneuve,
Hmm.
and I cited you speaking. I want to say about the Monaco Grand Prix. I think a race that he won in inferior machinery. I think you said
Would have been 81 in the turbo, yeah.
there you go. You
That's
said of
right.
it that every single time the car was so difficult to handle that every single time the stewards or the marshals even saw Gilles coming round a corner, that they were ducking for cover in anticipation of an
Well, yeah.
accident. of colossal proportion. Talk to us about that, Peter. Were you there in attendance? Because they said that that was probably proof positive of Gilles Villeneuve in his absolute pomp, being at his brilliant best.
Yeah, I was there, and I mean, it was a weird time because we had the turbos, and Ferrari had gone turbo, and they had this V6 turbo, and it was a beast of a car. I was always surprised, actually. Mario stepped into that car a year later at Monza, replacing Didier Pironi, and put it on the pole. And I was talking to him not so long ago, and he said, "Oh, that's probably the best Formula One car I ever drove." And I said,
Wow.
"Really? Better than a Lotus 79?" I said, "Well, the power, man, the power." And I suppose around Monza, I kind of get it, but in the hands of Gilles around Monaco in '81, it was just a beast. It was just all over the place, and don't forget, Gilles had already had a drama with the drive shafts at Ferrari the previous year, I think, or maybe '79. He banged a few guardrails as you would, and the drive shafts are broken. And he really, really, it was the first time he went to Enzo Ferrari and said, "Look, I've got to have some stronger drive shafts. Put Can-Am drive shafts on, whatever. I want big drive shafts for Monaco." And the first thing he did was ring Enzo after the race and say, "Thank you for the drive shafts." So yeah, he was bashing off a lot of stuff, and it was all about car control. That it was just Gilles at his Trois Rivières, former Atlantic, glancing off the guardrail at the perfect angle best. But to do that in a big, heavy turbo, I say heavy, it just looked heavy, unwieldy turbo car around Monaco was, yeah, we all took steps back. I mean, I remember watching him on Saturday on the outside of Casino Square on the days when with a proper pass you could just stand wherever you like. And yeah, he would hit the guardrail on exit. I don't know, 2 laps out of 5, I guess. Left rear, obviously, but it would always be perfect, bang like that. And yeah, and he was great. And unlike a lot of the drivers, when you go back to the pits after practice or qualifying, you see the veins popping on the forehead at Monaco and the neck even, and everything's absolutely, And Gilles was just out of the car, totally relaxed, loved it all. I mean, that was a great race actually for many reasons because Nigel was unbelievably quick as well in the Lotus, which was a pretty uncompetitive car even then. And he'd just come off of P3 at the Belgian Grand Prix at Zolder. And he went to Monaco. Everybody thought it was a bit of a fluke and inherited the results or whatever. But then, he went to Monaco and he was right there.
Wow.
And that was the first time Gilles and Nigel became sort of bonded as mates and friends. I think Gilles saw a lot in Nigel and vice versa of one another. And yeah, he was incredible. But going back to Gilles, it was, the whole thing was the turbo against the Cosworths that year because the turbos obviously had the power advantage, a power advantage that today a Formula One viewer would have no comprehension of
Hmm.
because the differences were ridiculous. It was like 500 horsepower versus 850 or whatever,
Wow.
massive difference. And so you could be all over them, all over the turbo cars until you get to the point where you're just on the throttle and then they just disappeared. And yeah, that race, in a way, I mean, if you add the fact that it's almost impossible to overtake at Monaco anyway, even in those days when the cars were smaller, it was a case of if Gilles gets in front and the car lasts, ain't anybody going to beat him.
Hmm.
And that proved to be a case, of course, in the Spanish Grand Prix at Jarama as well.
That was going to be my next
Yeah,
question.
well, it was a similar thing. I mean, obviously, it's not as tight as Monaco, but there was nowhere to overtake because it was all about Jarama is about traction and acceleration. And although the traction wasn't great on the Ferrari, it certainly had the acceleration. But what I remember most about Gilles' driving was how tough he was on gearboxes. Well, he would say, "Oh, I was not tough on gearboxes. I was perfect." But the reality was he did things that Ayrton Senna would never, ever in a million years do. And that is to go from, say, fifth to second into Rascasse or something like that, just to get the back end out and stop the car. And that's what he's in saying to Enzo Ferrari, "I want big drive shafts." He's also saying, "I want a much bigger crown wheel and pinion. I want the whole thing built like a truck." And he would actually use that to get the car set up. And that was what Gilles was all about. And if you throw that into a melting pot of 150 of 850 horsepower, you've got a guy who really has to know what he's doing around a circuit like
Wow.
Monaco
And
for 78 laps or whatever it was. And he did that lap after lap after lap. You saw it once. This is the thing about Gilles. You saw it once and you thought, wow, how did he get away with that? And then he did exactly the same thing the next lap. And then you realize that was what he was doing all the time. And there isn't really a driver today about which you can say that, I think, or because of course the cars are completely different. But if you see Max or Lewis or Charles out of shape, you just assume that next lap they're not going to be out of shape on that
Mm,
corner because they'll either be braking a little bit earlier or they're getting the power on a little bit differently. It's not going to happen twice the same way. But with Gilles, it happened 78 times in a row,
unbelievable.
and the tires, of course, could take it. And that was what was so enthralling about Gilles. He was just, I mean, he would have been a phenomenal rally driver. There's no doubt about it had he put his mind to it.
Yeah.
And as it was, he was an incredible snowmobile winner,
Mm.
champion, which is not that far away from rallying, I think. And he applied all that incredible car control to Formula One.
Wow.
And that car was the perfect showcase for it because it was a real brute of a car.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'll defy anybody saying that was a great Grand Prix car. It was a brute, that car.
Blimey. Which was the better of Gilles's performances then, Peter? Harama, because again, I think in quali, didn't he drop like 10 seconds on his teammate? Or Monaco? Which one do you think was the
Oh, I would say
pinnacle?
Monaco because of the confines and because of the difficulty in driving a car that brutal around Monaco. Harama's, there's more space. You got more spatial awareness. Jacques Lafitte really should have won that race in the Matra V12, but had a problem off the line or something like that. And he drove brilliantly. I think he finished fourth or fifth, something, or maybe even higher. He was the quick guy that day, and he should have won it. But I don't think at Monaco you could say. I mean, I would like to say Carlos should have won it, but bottom line is, Gilles got the break, and that was it, gone away. But Nigel for me was the other star of Monaco '81,
Oof.
definitely.
Oof. Different time. Goosebumps, Mr.
Well,
Windsor.
different times and different ways of a racing driver showing his talent. And Gilles, as I say, Gilles saw that brute of a Ferrari as a challenge, and he was also coming out of that horrendous year at Ferrari when he should have, he gave the championship to Jody in '79 in a sort of Lando Norris-esque way. And then 80, when he was supposed to get the championship back in a Lando Norris race engineer-esque way, of course, the car was nowhere and they did nothing in 80. So 81, this brute of a turbo car arrives and Gilles thinking, right, this is it, scruff of the neck time. Nothing is going to stop me winning Grand Prix in this thing.
Wow. Special
It was
man.
brilliant. Yeah, and the Simpson boots, the white Simpson boots, the overalls, the Smeg sponsorship, everything about Gilles was just wonderful.
Wow.
Actually, that was the year I went to his house near Cannes, and he had his big trailer parked out the front. And that was the trailer he used to take to all the Grand Prix. The first driver really to have a motorhome at a racetrack. Of course, Bernie put an end to all that fairly quickly, as he would, but it was a articulated, a semi-trailer, proper trailer thing, and he had these two mates from Canada looking after it, husband and wife team. And um, I remember his two kids, Jacques and Melanie were there, and it was just a lovely afternoon in the French countryside with Joe.
Wow. Oh,
Wonderful. And then he bought the house in Monaco, and he bought the big, powerboat. I don't know how many engines it had a more power than the Ferrari, I think. And he used to love waking everybody up at Monaco at 6 in the morning, revving them all massively. What a cool guy he was. I was going to buy a 124, his Fiat 124 Coupe, Spider actually, which he had. And but I didn't in the end because I always preferred the coupe. But I remember him going on about the Mustang he was doing up in Canada at the time. He just restored this Mustang. I think it was sort of Steve McQueen spec Mustang he had. I think it was a coupe fastback thing.
what a legend.
Yeah, lovely times, Gilles. Miss him dearly.
Yeah,
What a race
absolutely.
driver.
What one of the best to ever do it, Mr. Windsor by
Yeah, oh yeah, and very much forgotten. I think a lot of people never really because he didn't win a lot of races. He wasn't around for very long, sadly. And a couple of those years were fallow years. But he was just, it was for me, it was sort of Tazio Nuvolari-ish. That's how you think of Gilles. Similar stature too to Tazio.
yeah.
And
Again,
Nigel Roebuck was my other buddy, actually. You mentioned that podcast. Oh, no, it's not. That was Matt Bishop, wasn't it? But Nigel Roebuck was my big buddy in Formula One for many years, still is. And he and I were both massive Gilles fans. And we were together. We walked to the crash site in '82 at Zolder together down to the crash site from the pits. And we never needed one another more, I think, than that night on the Saturday night at Zolder. And without Nigel, I'm not sure how I could have got through that whole period as well, as quickly as we did. Well, I suppose Formula One just carried on, didn't it?
Yeah.
But yeah, one of the worst moments of my life, that.
Blimey, Peter. That's
Mm.
hard hitting stuff. I didn't know that you were there in situ. That's
Yeah, I was there, and it was just terrible. I was at the funeral too, flew out to Canada for the funeral, and that was, unbearably sad as well.
oh, Mr. Windsor. On that
Mm.
this is why, segueing, if you're not subscribed to Mr. Peter D. Windsor's YouTube channel, I don't genuinely, Peter, and I don't say this tongue in cheek, I don't know where else I could get this information and those stories. Genuinely, it's I think you're
Thanks, Cameron. I mean, before this podcast, I was thinking, what are we going to be talking about here?
I
Because not
know.
much has happened. I mean, for sure, we're going to be talking about the Border Gavaskar Trophy win by Australia and how brilliant that was for Test cricket and how we should go back to classics and get away from all this T20 sprint qualifying stuff and go back to proper Formula One in the same way that cricket has now shown the way with Test match cricket and so forth. And then I thought maybe you're going to bring up Hideki Matsuyama winning the Century Open in Hawaii today and the winning margin there, and how wonderful it is to see an athlete who barely says anything and just gets out and says everything with his
Mm.
with his golf clubs and doesn't talk, obviously because he's Japanese and doesn't really want to speak in English. And isn't that a refreshing change as well? And I
100%.
thought they're bound to be your two lead topics, but
Oh
no,
no.
it's Gilles Villeneuve. So I'm pleasantly surprised, I must
Yeah,
say.
there's lots to always cover in the weird and wacky world that is Formula One. It's and it's going to be an interesting couple of months, Mr. Windsor, seeing how these story arcs continue to develop. Mercedes, will Max Verstappen stay at Red Bull? Will they build him a car quick enough using which he can
Well,
defend his
it is a
championship?
very that to me that's the most interesting question of all. How are Red Bull going to go in 25? It's a real test, isn't it? It's a real pressure in a way on Adrian Newey because he's got the pressure to deliver at Aston Martin, and B, if Red Bull do go well, some people, not me,
Mm.
might say, well, how big a role did Adrian play in all
Yeah.
of that? There's pressure both sides of the fence there. I mean, the easy option is to take the Adrian option and say, well, the guy's a complete and utter megastar, and Red Bull will collapse, and Aston Martin will win 5 Grand Prix next year, and Fernando will be third in the championship or whatever.
Oh,
That's the easy option. But equally, Red Bull haven't looked terrible since Adrian left. Maybe that's just momentum, and maybe it'll all catch up with them as time goes on. But it's been interesting Red Bull team, won't it? Because Christian Horner, in theory, you'd imagine will be sort of revitalized and a bit hungry to get on and put everything behind him. And then you've got Liam Lawson, who for sure has been told that he's there to knit the team together to score more points than Perez and to support Max. And he said, yes, 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 no problem. Yes, no problem. And he probably will do a very good job in that area. Then there's Max who's saying, well, if you don't give me the car, I ain't going to win the world championship. So give me the car and I'll do the job. And then there's all the engineering team who are thinking, right, we can show that we can do it without Adrian. That's quite an interesting, I mean,
it's
more than anything, that's the most interesting part of the year, I think. Obviously, you could say, well, how's Lewis going to go at Ferrari? But, the answer to that is if he goes as well as Carlos Sainz, he'll be doing a good job
yeah.
by winning races and doing as well as he can do in that car. And Charles will do a better job over the year, probably, because he's the incumbent driver and he's quick anyway. That's that, and then you've got Mercedes, you've got George, and they'll probably be about the same, a little bit more consistent, probably. But the big question for me is that Red Bull thing, and that's going to be fascinating.
I cannot wait. I cannot wait to see the car. I can't wait to hear the tone, the way in which they're talking about it, to see their posture. I can't wait for testing as well, Peter. It's going to
Yeah, I
be
wouldn't I wouldn't put too much store in that because
you know,
whatever they say will be meaningless until the thing actually starts. And even testing will be fairly difficult to draw any conclusions. But when the racing starts, that's when we can really start to focus on where we're at and what can be expected in 25.
oof,
And yeah, there'll be lots of stuff going on with the livery launch and all that rubbish. But the real thing will be Bahrain.
testing proper. Max apparently hasn't Hasn't fared too well at Australia. Two out of the past. So in 22, DNF'd and
Is Australia the first one now?
yeah, Australia's the
Oh,
first
sorry, I
one.
meant Australia then. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
Australia will be the first one, but he's
Yeah.
DNF'd in the past. So he DNF'd last year, didn't he? And then he
Yeah, I don't
DNF'd
think all
again.
those stats and how you went the previous year actually don't mean anything
Yeah,
at all,
true, true.
because it's just certain sets of circumstance.
Yeah, it's
He'll be, if the car's half reasonable, of
he'll
course
be
he'll be
there.
quick around there.
He'll be there.
Australia's a bit of a weird circuit, though. It's not, it's a bit of everything. It hasn't got, I don't, for me, Australia doesn't have a core, a center core that you can then take to other circuits and say, well, if you're quick in Melbourne, you're definitely going to be quick here, here, and there. To me, it's sort of lots of little things going on in Australia. It's quite an eventful race. Plus, the track evolves massively over the weekend.
Agreed.
And again, you can see a Fernando or somebody like that coming out of the box and going quite well on somewhere like Melbourne. I keep
Yeah,
talking about that only because, we've got to talk about him now because they've got Adrian Newey there.
I know.
And that could
Jeez.
be a setup race more than it is anything else. And if it's a setup race, Adrian's going to be very, very helpful. Put him alongside Tom McCullough, and you got two of the best brains in Formula One, I think,
Yeah, yeah.
in that team now.
Blimey. If
Um, and then there's other little things. Then you got Carlos Sainz leaving Ferrari to go to
oh,
Williams,
Peter, yeah.
and yet the team he chose not to go to, Sauber, Audi, were much quicker than Williams in the last race of 2024. So what would he be thinking over the winter? No, I did say the best option for him is a long-term deal with Audi, no question about it.
Yeah.
And he didn't take that. He's gone to Williams because of the short-term pace of Williams, probably exceeding that of Sauber. But with Jonathan Wheatley there now, I can't see how that team's going to go downhill
They'll
from where they were at
improve.
Abu Dhabi even.
Peter, I echo Carlos Sainz's sentiments about Sauber, soon to be Audi, because I think they bought a team. I think they bought a team and they figured that they were further down their learning curve than they had been. So Benotto and not Jonathan Wheatley necessarily, but Benotto's been very open and honest and said he thought that Sauber were here, but they're actually here. Like, as he's gone to the factory and seen the inner workings of the team, he understands them now to be more regressed than he first anticipated. So, I mean, if that's anything to go by, I see why Carlos Sainz was charmed by James Vowles' short to medium term Williams pitch.
Now, I don't think that is anything to go by. That is just standard Formula One talk, isn't it? If you're a leader of a new team, the first thing you always say is, oh, I never realized how bad this team was. It's terrible. It's much worse than I imagined. It's going to take me even longer to get it right. You just build in lots of excuses so that nobody can blame you if you're not quick by race three. That's all that is.
True.
And as we saw in Abu Dhabi, if the team is actually quite good, and forget about Benotto. I would say Jonathan Wheatley is the key guy there now, and I can imagine a situation where Benotto is saying, and I'm only imagining this now, but Benotto might be saying, "Oh, there's no question we need to do an upgrade. We need to reshape the underfloor of the chassis, and it's going to take this. It's going to take 6 months, and it's going to take this much out of the budget. But if we do that, I'm very confident we can have a 3% increase in downforce against drag or something." And I can imagine Jonathan Wheatley saying, "Forget all that rubbish. Do a new floor now. It's going to take 3 weeks. Blah, blah, blah. I know the carbon guys. We'll get it done. Blah, blah, blah." And it'll all just happen in a sort of Freddie Vasseur practical sort of way. And I think Jonathan Wheatley, as we saw from Abu Dhabi 21, is one of the great politicians in Formula One. And I think he'll have absolutely no problem, if he's ever in a position to be disagreeing with Binotto, to enforce his position. That's what I think will happen there. And that's why I keep saying, for me, the way Freddie Vasseur is basically saying, we don't need Adrian Newey. With these regulations, as they are, they're kind of running out of steam anyway. 26 is going to be all about electrification of the power unit and how well that's done. The regulations are going to be even tighter around what we can do with the car. Even more of the car is going to be designed by the rule book. Obviously, there's going to be freedom to do various things. But if we apply logic and a systematic approach, as distinct from lots of managerial time-wasting decisions, we can get on with it. We can do it. And I think Freddie sees that he can keep that whole engineering thing moving without an Adrian Newey for exactly that reason. There's so little scope now to be truly innovative. And I think Jonathan Wheatley is of the same ilk as Freddie Vasseur. I think he will keep Ma- Mattia on the straight and narrow in terms of what is achievable and what isn't. And I think that's where they'll go. And if they've got to suddenly run Ferrari engines instead of whatever engine they're going to do, they'll do it. And if they got to get a gearbox from somebody else, they'll do it.
Yeah.
That's the way Jonathan Wheatley is. He's not one of these guys that's just going to want to do it perfectly. And he's not going to take lots of corporate rubbish from Audi either. He's just going to say, this is the way it is. You hired me. This is the way we do it. Get on with it.
Can't wait.
That's why you get a guy from Red Bull to do that job. And I
Yeah.
think they've done a very good, they made a right decision to get Jonathan Wheatley there. Whether, I mean, of course, if he doesn't last there, that's a different story. But at the moment, he is there, and I think he'll do a very good job.
Yeah.
Whereas, yeah, I don't know about Williams. I can't really comment on that.
Yeah.
I just can't see that it's a great thing to have Carlos Sainz having to race against Alex Albon and Albon having to race against Carlos Sainz. Similar sorts of drivers, everything looks. I don't know. I just don't have a great feel for that whole setup.
Oh. And on that bombshell, Mr. Windsor, you've been super generous with your time. As always, if you're watching this on the YouTubes, go over and subscribe to the Peter Windsor channel. Please do yourselves a favour. Greatest insight on all of F1 YouTubes. If you're listening on a podcasting platform, go and subscribe to Peter D. Windsor's market leading Short Corners podcast. You've been a legend as always, Mr. Windsor. Thank you so much for the time, sir. Between now and next time, as always, remember to look but never stare.